So I got a message not too long ago about about a guy who's wanting to know how I do my flash ambient blending, and he wants me to basically go into a lot of detail on kind of like what is going through my head as I'm going all over the room and just blending everything. And he also wants to know about flash settings for my shots and how do I get that to be a little bit consistent throughout the shots. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start off with my basic side-to-side workflow, and I'll just go through the frames real quick so you can understand on like what it is that I'm doing. So this is my base flash frame, and it's just a flash above my camera pointed into the ceiling, angled slightly away from the subject. So if you ever have one of these annoying things here, you won't get a shadow. As you can see, no shadow, no shadow. We have a slight shadow from these lights, but it's so minor that it doesn't even bother me. Plus, you'll get rid of it with this frame and this frame. So, base flash frame, nothing too fancy. How do I go about getting the flash setting correct? It's actually really simple. It's just it's not trial and error. I mean, sure, when I started out, it was trial and error because I didn't know how to do math correctly. And so basically, my settings are always fairly consistent in my interior. So it's always f7.1 and ISO 320. I know it says 400. I used a Canon T3i. I couldn't get to 320 because of the limitations of the firmware on the T3i. I'm sure if I got Magic Lantern on it, I would be able to go down to 320, but I just chose the next best thing. And typically, if I have lights on, I'm at 1/60th of a second. But I figured, windows aren't open all the way. I can do a window pull for this. And I can cut down on the highlights with that window pull. I'm just worried about these two windows right here. So 1/60th of a second got me pretty good detail out there. I don't need a ton of detail because there's houses and a wall and a tree. So nothing too fancy. So flash. If I take all of these numbers into consideration, I will go with, I have to take the numbers into consideration. So 1/60th of a second at f7.1 ISO 400. Okay? Pretty basic stuff. And then I have to look at the room and say, okay, the room is this color. I'm bouncing it off this object. I'm bouncing it into this material. What is going to be the outcome and what's going to be my flash power? That's what goes through my head whenever I'm lighting a interior space. So if I have this room that's not completely white with a not completely white ceiling, I'm going to want to have a higher flash frame, I want a higher flash power for my flash frame than I would if I had a completely white room. So if this was completely white, I would probably be somewhere around half power on a Godox 8200. And that's for a room of this size. Because if I'm bouncing into a white ceiling, into a white room, that white ceiling and white room, that's tough to say, is going to bounce light like crazy. But for this room, where we have the dark cabinets and the slightly darker shade of it's more like a cream color, but we have these colors here that are a little bit darker. It's not going to bounce around the room the way I'd like it to, so I need to compensate by bringing the flash power up. So I went to a full power on a Godox 8200, and that got it pretty good. It's not perfect by any means, So that's where the compositing comes in to even out the exposure. So as you can see, these cabinets are still too dark. This is way too bright. If we try to blend that, it's not gonna look that great. There's just no detail in it whatsoever. So I should have moved that, but anyway, let's move on to the next flash frame. This is the flash frame for my left side. So if I bring up the view and the loop overlay, and I go with guides, you can see this side is not going to be used, but this left side is going to be used. So the only thing that I care about is anything in the left frame. And it's a little bit dark, but I can bring up that exposure. And as you can see, to avoid getting that fan shadow, I angled my flash away from the area that I wanted to light. So we're bouncing it right in this kitchen, and it's pretty much just going into the kitchen like right here, but it is reflecting a little bit of light, at least a stop less of light than you'd think it would. So let's move on to the next flash frame. And this is just for my right side. As you can see, this is pretty bright. This is really dark, but I can take some of this and then place it in here just to get a little bit more detail. So as you can see right now, this is angled more up. I didn't want the flash to go this direction because I knew it's just gonna hit a big open area right here. So I angled it just a little bit more up than what I usually do, just so I can get it across to this kitchen area. And look what it's doing to the sofa here. Look at that nice highlight and shadow detail. It's awesome. And then we have our ambient frame, which is a little bit underexposed. It looks pretty good on the histogram, but it is still too dark in the shadows, like you can see right here. So there's not a lot of detail, and we're gonna fix that with our raw adjustments. So I went to 0.3 of a second, and then I f7.1 ISO 400, so those stayed pretty consistent. And so I'm just messing with shutter speed right now. And so we went with a brighter frame, and I kind of got the average brightness correct. I know I could have probably gotten brighter, but I would have risked getting too much light. I'd rather be a little, like slightly underexposed with my ambient frame than like overexposed in the ambient frame. And then I did can't talk, words are hard. I did a window pull, which is kind of not like me at all. I typically don't do window pulls very often, but I did one for this because there was a ton of light coming in on this. I could have gone to 1/200 of a second for my base flash frames, but I would risk having too deep of shadows. So if I went and tried to get this, I would have a lot of noise and a lot of image degradation going on. So let's go back to here, and I got this pretty well exposed around the window frame for the darken method. This is a little bit of an issue, but I don't think we're going to be blending that. And this is fine. So this is plenty bright. As you can see, the Godox right there. It's actually the Evolve 200. You can see it like a little bit right there, but it's fine. I have the, what's it called? I guess it's just the reflector, I guess is what it's called. The reflector dish, I guess? I'm not sure. And then I have the diffuser on it. So that's pretty much it. So I'm going to start with selecting all these. So I'm going to select the first image, hold down Shift, and select the last image. I'm gonna go all the way down here to lens corrections, and I'm gonna remove chromatic aberration, and I'm gonna enable profile corrections. Sorry about that, the phone rang and I had to go get that. But anyway, so remove chromatic aberration, enable profile corrections, that's all done and dandy. I'm going to zero out my sharpening. I'm going to go to my luminance, and I'm gonna bring the blue luminance down to -40. You might be asking, why am I doing that? Well, for certain images, there is sky detail out there. Plus, I like blue. So if I bring the blue brightness down, I feel like it's getting that look that I really want. Maybe I'll even go even further as -45. I like what it's doing to this right here. So if we turn this off and on, it just gets a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to go to saturation. I'm going to bring the orange saturation up to 45. And you'll see why in a minute, because we're going to go to our saturation. I'm going to bring that down to about 20, -20, I should say. I'm going to go to my clarity. I'm going to bring in about 10 clarity. And then I'm going to bring the shadows all the way up, and I'm going to bring the highlights all the way down. So now that we have our image nice and evened out in the mid-tones, we need to add contrast back in with our white and black sliders. Before I do that though, I'm going to deselect by holding down Command and clicking on the images that I want to deselect, which is our Windows and Ambient frame. And I'm going to white balance this using the base. I should remove this. I'm sorry, guys. I am going to white balance this image. So I'm going to go with the white balance tool. You can also use W on the keyboard, which is just way faster. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to white balance that. And I think that looks pretty good, and maybe a little bit too... Yeah, there we go. So it was just a little bit too cool. But anyway, so there's that, there's that. And you might be saying to yourself, look at all that noise, Hunter. What are you going to do about that noise? Here's the thing about me. I actually really like grain in my images. I actually used to add a lot of grain to my images when I was doing this like a couple of years ago. But now I can just use higher ISOs and kind of get that same effect. But I really like grain. I know it's noise, but like it's kind of the same thing. But I just like it. So I'm going to deselect all the images except for one. And we are going to do our whites. So hold down Alt or Option and click on the white slider. And we're going to bring that up till we start seeing a little bit of white. So you can see those white pixels. If I bring this all the way up, anything that's white is completely burned out, so there's no detail in there. Anything that's in color is almost burnt out, but you know, it's not really. So I'm gonna go with like +20. And then black, I push my blacks pretty hard. So I'm gonna go with, let's see what -50 looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And now we're gonna do the same thing for this one. I'm gonna bring the exposure up by just dragging this middle section. So you can see it says exposure on the histogram, and you can just drag the middle, and then that'll affect the exposure. So I'm at 0.34. And I'm gonna go to the whites. I'm gonna go to the whites, and I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and start to get those white points in there. Then I'll get the black points. Yeah, let's go -35. I don't want to push this one too hard. Next one, hold down Alt or Option, and go to the whites. I'm gonna bring that to about, I like my numbers to be divisible by 5. Such a weird thing, but it's kind of just the way I am. I'm just a weird person. Now we'll go to -50. Okay, that looks pretty good. My finger itches. And then this one, we need to do this one. I'm gonna bring the exposure down a little bit. Whites, hold down Alt or Option. You know the deal. I'm gonna go with like 20. And then I'm gonna do the same thing for the blacks. So anything that's black is completely dark. So completely black. That looks pretty good. This one I don't really ever touch. I like the way this is right now. So I'm just gonna bring the exposure down right there. And I'm gonna leave that right there. So that looks pretty good. I'm actually going to bring the exposure up on this one, just so I have a little bit more detail in the background. Not too worried about the foreground since these two will cover that. So now what we'll do is hold down Shift, select all the images by clicking on one image to another. And we're gonna go ahead and edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. So when I'm in Photoshop, I typically use Photoshop Actions. But I'm going to show you how to do it manually because I feel like that's really helpful to new users, how to do it manually. So let's go ahead, and once this loads, I'm going to show you exactly what I do. And it's really cool, actually. So what we'll do is we'll click one image. So click the top image. Hold down Shift, select the bottom image. That's going to select all. You can do the same thing by going to Select, and then All Layers. So that's, what is that? Alt Command A. That'll select all the images, or all the layers, I should say. And we're going to go to Layer, Arrange, Reverse. So I shoot in a way that makes sense to do the reversing of the layers. And I'm going to turn off these two top layers, which is my window pull and my ambient. And we're going to blend this frame. So what we'll do is we will we will add a layer mask. Make sure we're on the brush tool. And make sure our foreground is black because we're painting on a white mask. So I'm going to change the flow to 30. I'm going to bring that down, and what I'm doing is I'm holding down Control and Option and left clicking to resize my brush. You can do the same thing with the bracket keys, but I prefer to do it this way. I find it just a little bit quicker. And same thing with the hardness, go up and down, change the hardness, go left to right, change the brush size. So I'm going to go with like a brush about there. And we're just going to paint. Just paint. And I like to do circles. I don't know why, I just like to do the circular kind of thing. So that looks pretty good. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna move the first layer, which is our base, and I'm going to change the blend mode to darken. And you'll see, all these reflections and everything? Gone. But it keeps the way the shadows looked, which is really nifty. And if you ever need to blend in the lighter pixels, just duplicate it and change that to Lighten. So I'll keep that one right there. And I'm going to hold down Option or Alt and add a black layer mask. And now I'm going to switch my foreground to white. So I'm going to hit X on the keyboard. If you ever get the, the foreground swatches mixed up, let's say like it turned gray or something, just hit D on the keyboard. That's going to reset your swatches. So let's go ahead and bring the flow down to 15%, because I'm going to work pretty slowly on this one. Just like so. Perfect. And then I'm gonna go to the Lighten, do the same thing, and we're gonna do this one right here just to add some detail under those shadows. Right there and right there. Yeah, that looks good. Maybe a little bit right there, just to soften that shadow. Next, what we wanna do is our ambient. And I do my ambient a little bit different these days. So what I'll do is I go to the channels, what is this? Channels tab in the layers channels path. So you can go to window, and then channels if you don't have it up. I go to the blue channel. I make a selection out of this. So I'm holding down Command and left clicking. That'll make a selection. And then I go back to RGB, go back to the layers palette, and I will add a layer mask. But before I do that, I will hold down Option to invert the layer mask. So as you can see, we're now inverted what our selection was. We inverted what our selection was. So there we go. And then I will double click on my layer mask to get to the properties panel, and I will feather this by 100 pixels. And then I will generally add more or less to, I'll add more or less to the final composite depending on how it looks. So I think that looks pretty good. Next, what we want to do is our window on this one. I think there's just a little bit too much blown out information right there. So I'm going to take this window pool, and I'm going to set the blend mode to darken. As you can see, we have blended that window in, but we need to do it a little bit more selectively. So let's go ahead and zoom in. Go to the brush tool, make sure the foreground swatch is white. Hold down, or not hold down. What is it? Just press X on the keyboard, and then I'll swap your foreground and background swatches. So I think that looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit too much there. I'm just doing little dabs here and there. So I think that looks really, really snazzy. What's going on here, though? No, that's not it. Yeah, it's this one. So it's the ambient layer that's causing this issue. So I'm going to paint black just to remove that. Paint black right there. Paint white right there. Cool. Command 0 will fit to screen, and then Command - will zoom right out. So now what I'll do is I go to my adjustments here, and I'll make a layer adjustment for curves. And this will just allow me to do the same thing that I did with the black and white points in Lightroom. So I'll hold down Alt, make sure my blacks are pretty black, and make sure my whites are pretty white. So there we go. Just a little bit of contrast was lost. So now what we'll do is we will flatten the image. And I'm going to do Command S, save, go back into Lightroom, and this is where I will do my crop. So I usually crop pretty heavy on my images, so I'm going to go from the top to the bottom, and we will go about right there, maybe actually a little bit further. Yeah, about right there. And get rid of that. And that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and do our vertical adjustments. Maybe auto looks better. Neither are looking good. So that's pretty much it on how I do my images. I don't typically do sharpening, but if I was to do sharpening, I'll add like 30 points. And then I'll switch the radius to 1.5. So that looks pretty good. And that is what I would call a finished image. So there we go. That's pretty much it. I do the same kind of thing with the twilights and exteriors, minus the flash frames, but it's the same basic process. So that's pretty much it. If you enjoyed, please give me a like and subscribe, click the bell, and join the Facebook group, because that's where I post most of my stuff. So yeah, that's it. That's it. I'm out of here. It's 12:23 p.m. and I'm hungry. I gotta eat. Oh man, my stomach is growling. Anyway, take care, guys.